Welcome. I'm Lee Cowan, and this is Here Comes the Sun, a closer look at some of the people, places, and things we bring you every weekend on Sunday morning. Mark Hamill is perhaps best known for playing lightsaber-wielding Jedi Master Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars franchise. He told our Tracy Smith, though, about the moment that he realized that first film was kind of a big deal.
Nothing could have prepared him for what happened when Star Wars premiered in the spring of '77.
We started the publicity tour. It was Carrie, Harrison, and me. And when we landed in Chicago, I looked out and I saw there were crowds outside. I said, hey, you guys, there must be somebody famous on this plane. We're looking around for like some, superstar athlete or whatever. They're dressed like us. There was no merchandising at the time, so they had, made homemade lightsabers and all these things. We sort of looked at each other and said, wow.
Later in the show, Mark Hamill on that fateful Star Wars audition.
Usually when you finish an audition, your agent will call and say, how did it go? Oh, wow, I think I did great. I really nailed it. Or I was just off. My timing wasn't that great. On Star Wars, I said, I have no idea.
You didn't know at all?
At all. How I did. I mean, I got the words out. George said, thank you. Harrison said, see you. And that's it.
Plus, Luke Burbank looks back on the extraordinary life and wisdom of 109-year-old Charlie White.
Stories that comprise much of Von Drehle's new book, The Book of Charlie. And yes, you read that cover right. Charlie lived to be 109.
What are some of those kind of historical and otherwise amazing things about somebody who lives to be 109?
He was born before radio. By the end of his life, he had an iPhone. He lived from the days of horse-drawn carriages to see people on the International Space Station.
That's all coming up right here on Here Comes the Sun. Star Wars made Mark Hamill a household name, but he wasn't always comfortable being known primarily for his role as Luke Skywalker, as he told our Tracy Smith.
In 2015, on a remote island high above the sea, Star Wars fans had a reunion with an old friend, Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. And this past week, at his home high above the sea in Malibu, California, we caught up with him again.
How long have you lived here?
Let's see, we got this in 1978.
Hamill moved here after the first Star Wars film made him a household name.
I heard you call yourself elderly in an interview the other day. You see yourself as elderly?
Well, I called myself an elderly recluse. No, well, it's one of those things where when you say your age out loud, because I'm 71, I go, really? That's older than I ever expected to be.
How do you feel inside?
Much younger. We should be safe in here.
And that's a good thing. His latest movie, The Machine, is not for the faint of heart.
Dad.
I can't use that. After I read Mandela's biography, I made a vow of non-violence.
In the film, real-life comedian Bert Kreischer is in trouble with the Russian mob, and Hamill is his endearing and often annoying father.
And it took about 2 seconds before he started making me mental with the... Look at it! Oh, bear.
He's a monster.
I was drawn to the project because of the relationship between the son and the father. I mean, they're at odds and trying to understand one another.
And a good father-son storyline
I am your father.
is something Mark Hamill knows all about. In the first Star Wars film, a young Luke Skywalker ponders his future with a double son and that John Williams score. But what we're actually seeing here is a 25-year-old actor on the ride of his life.
Take us back to the first audition for Star Wars. You weren't sure whether to play it straight?
Well, the problem was they didn't give us a whole script. And yeah, I couldn't figure out, is this like a send-up of Flash Gordon or whatever? You couldn't tell. 'Cause nobody talks like this. And I was asking Harrison, because he had been in American Graffiti. I said, you know, George, is this like a joke, or should we send it up, make fun of it? Yeah, whatever, let's get it done. So he was no help.
Well, now you know. The enemy's on the move. We haven't much time.
Well, I brought you here. Now what?
Of course, he got the part and was soon working with legends like Sir Alec Guinness.
Rest easy, son. You've had a busy day.
Just meeting him was such a thrill.
What was that like?
Oh my gosh, he took me out to lunch just to get to know each other a little bit. And I kept calling him Sir Alex. And at one point he tapped my face a little harder. I went, ow, what? I want to be known by my name, not my accolade.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, so can I call you Big Al?
You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
He looked like an eager kid.
Hey, Lori, it really doesn't make any difference.
But Mark Hamill had a few years in the business under his belt,
I don't see why I was gonna do the digging. Just be glad the cow didn't die.
with a raft of soap operas and TV series credits. Still, nothing could have prepared him for what happened when Star Wars premiered in the spring of '77.
We started the publicity tour. It was Carrie, Harrison, and me. And when we landed in Chicago, I looked out and I saw there were crowds outside. I said, hey, you guys, there must be somebody famous on this plane. We're looking around for like some, superstar athlete or whatever. They're dressed like us. There was no merchandising at the time, so they had, made homemade lightsabers and all these things. We sort of looked at each other and said, wow.
Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars.
Wow is right. The first film alone grossed nearly $800 million on an $11 million budget and became the cultural phenomenon we all know. But by 1981, Hamill wanted to shake his Luke Skywalker image and started doing Broadway shows, including the role of Mozart in Amadeus.
Did you want to play Mozart in the movie?
I went in and I met with Milos Forman, and in between I said, I'd really love a chance at playing Mozart. And he said, oh, no, the Luke Skywalker is not to be being the Mozart. So I thought, well, at least he's honest.
Was that a common refrain? We're not going to buy Luke Skywalker in this role?
Well, I'm sure in their minds. I mean, I at least admire the fact that he said it right to my face. But it's a crazy business.
Did that hurt?
Well, I was disappointed, but I thought all you can do is you got to go forward.
His co-star Carrie Fisher helped him put it all in perspective.
She told you back when you were doing theater not to be so precious about theater?
She said, what did you put in the playbill? He's also known for a series of popular space movies.
Is that what you put in the playbill?
Yeah, something like that. And she said, get over yourself. Look, you're Luke Skywalker. I'm Princess Leia. Just accept it.
Like always, you're as tough as nails.
Hamill's life off-screen has been remarkable as well. He's an accomplished voice actor.
Hello? Anybody home?
And a family man. He and his wife Marilou have been married 45 years and have 3 children.
Attention, air raid alert.
And if you find yourself in Ukraine during an airstrike,
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
you might hear Luke Skywalker's voice talking you down.
To be that voice of reassurance in a horrible crisis has got to feel good.
It feels great to be able to do something, instead of just twiddle my thumbs and curse at the television.
Strike me down in anger and I'll always be with you.
Hamill made his most recent Star Wars film appearance in 2017's The Last Jedi. He can't and won't say if he'll ever return.
I had my time, and that's good. But that's enough.
So even though you say you won't go back, there's always a chance that you could go back.
Well, you never say never. I just I don't see any reason to. Let me put it that way. I mean, they have so many stories to tell. They don't need Luke anymore.
You know that a lot of people out there would argue they always need Luke.
And even if he never picks up another lightsaber, the role will always be a part of him.
At this point, you could basically win a Grammy, cure cancer, and still forever you were going to be Luke Skywalker. Have you accepted that?
Yeah, well, I don't care. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I never really expected to be remembered for anything. I just wanted to make a living doing what I liked. And I thought it could be worse. I could be like known as being the best actor who ever played Adolf Hitler, you know, or at least Luke is an admirable fellow.
The Force will be with you, always.
Up next, an exclusive excerpt from our chat with Mark Hamill. Something you can only see right here on CBS News Streaming. Stay with us.
This is just really in my wheelhouse. I love this kind of thing.
As promised, here's more from Tracy Smith and Mark Hamill.
These movies mean so much to people. What are the things that they've told you? I mean, this is so deep for people, Star Wars. What kind of things have you heard from people?
Well, they always personalize it. They relate to the movies and tell me stories that involve how it's become a fabric of their life, whether it got them through a parent's illness or they met their future spouse at a screening or whatever it is. And what's interesting that wherever you go, people feel like they know you, so they come right up to you and talk. And sometimes it's moving, really, to hear how much it has impacted their lives. Now, usually when you finish an audition, your agent will call and say, "How did it go?" Like, "Oh, wow, I think I did great. I really nailed it," or "I was just off. My timing wasn't that great." On Star Wars, I said, I have no idea.
You didn't know at all?
At all, how I did. I mean, I got the words out. George said, "Thank you." Harrison said, "See you." And that's it.
So you said that you knew that it would be huge, at least as a cult film, if nothing else. When did you know this is giant, this is life-changing?
I had said, you know, because Robert Watts is the production designer, said, production manager, "What do you think of this?" I said, "I think we're on a winner." I had my friend look up all these. He worked in the film department at the museum in Los Angeles, and I said, "Look up how much all the science fiction and fantasy movies made, you know, from the sound era on." And he brought it, and he had read it. You know, I was passing the script around to everybody that wanted to read it because no one cared.
There was no secrecy at that time about the first one.
I said, "This is the nuttiest thing. You got to read it." So, and they would say, "Can I give it to Meredith?" "Sure."
That didn't happen with Empire Strikes Back.
No. From then on, it was like, then it mattered that we keep it a secret. But I said, "This is going to outgrow Planet of the Apes," and I meant the original one. Because it wound up costing a little around 9, so it'd have to make 18 plus 4.5. So I said, "Oh, this will do 25 easy to break even." I said, "This might even make 35 or 40. And I was hoping that it would happen because if it was a hit, then we got to make the sequel. So that's what I was hoping would happen.
Wow. What was it like to see your face everywhere on lunch boxes and goodness?
Well, I love all that kind of stuff, you know. I was the one that would say, "Hey, you guys, I'm a mask on the back of this box of cereal." And Harrison's like, "Whatever." He didn't care. Carrie sort of enjoyed it, I think, more than Harrison. But, you know, it was just one of those things. Because when I was a kid, I loved these. Listen, if I had not gotten the part, I would have been there first day, first show. This is just really in my wheelhouse. I love this kind of thing. So it was great fun.
Do you have other things on your list that you say I'd love to do?
I don't have anything where I go, I've got to do X, Y, or Z, no.
It seems that you spent so much time building this whole life away from Star Wars. And then in 2015, Luke comes back.
Well, I said to him, well, Harrison's never going to do it because, you know, he's so successful on his own. And that would give me an out if I didn't want to do it. But then when I heard he accepted, I thought, oh, it's like being drafted. Can you imagine if I said no? I'd be the most hated man in nerddom.
Up next, an extraordinary life well lived. You could say Charlie White learned a few things in his 109 years. And now, a new book looks back on his remarkable stories and no-nonsense advice. Here's Luke Burbank.
It was a typical Sunday in August 2007 in a suburb of Kansas City when David Von Drehle spotted his new neighbor.
And Charlie was in the drive wearing just a pair of swim trunks, and he's washing his girlfriend's car. Big, muscular chest.
At 102. Charlie was Charlie White, and yes, he was 102. He'd already lived a couple of lifetimes and still had a lot of road in front of him. Meanwhile, Von Drehle and his young family had just moved from Washington, D.C. The two became fast friends.
We'd usually sit in his den, and he'd tell me stories.
Stories that comprise much of Von Drehle's new book, The Book of Charlie, published by Simon & Schuster, which is part of our parent company, Paramount Global. And yes, you read that cover right. Charlie lived to be 109.
What are some of those kind of historical and otherwise amazing things about somebody who lives to be 109?
He was born before radio. By the end of his life, he had an iPhone. He lived from the days of horse-drawn carriages to see people on the International Space Station.
Charles White III was born in 1905 in Galesburg, Illinois. The son of a pastor, his family relocated to Kansas City so his father could supplement their income with a second job. But his father's life ended tragically at just 42.
He, really described his childhood sort of ending that day.
So, at age 8, Charlie's adult life began. He built his own radio to listen to Kansas City's jazz scene and then taught himself saxophone. Eventually, he became a doctor, paying his way through college playing that sax. And for perspective, Charlie's medical career started before penicillin, and he went on to become one of the first anesthesiologists in Kansas City. He didn't hang up his stethoscope until his 90s, a testament to his amazing ability to change with the times.
I think of him as a great Stoic. Classical philosophers who emphasize the difference between the things we have control over in our lives and everything else that's outside of our control.
He was just so incredibly wise, and he had a calming effect. I can maybe remember one time he was mad at me. I mean, he just was a very calm person.
Lori White is one of Charlie's daughters, born when he was already 52 years old.
He had a full head of white hair, and I remember everybody thought he was my grandfather.
Despite being an older dad, Lori says Charlie was as vigorous as could be, and would remain so for an astonishing number of years.
He had a 1967 convertible Mustang, and in the summertime, he'd go to my oldest sister's house almost every day, and he'd swim 100 laps.
About how old is he in this story?
Oh my goodness. He did it through his 90s and up until he was probably 104.
And that beloved 67 Mustang? Lori's still got it.
Do you feel a connection to your dad when you're driving this car?
I do. Yes, and I've had interesting things happen, like saxophone music will come on the radio, just come on the radio.
Really?
And, I'm like, oh, Dad,
I think Dr. Charlie added a whole lot to Mom's last while here. Yeah.
Chris Cooper may not have gotten the chance to ride in Charlie's Mustang, but he did get to see the effect Charlie had on his beloved mother, Mary Ann Walton Cooper.
One of the aspects of the great relationship between Charlie and my mother was the laughter. At that late age, they were just enjoying life.
If Cooper looks familiar, yes, he's that Chris Cooper, the Oscar-winning actor who grew up in Kansas City. His mother had been married with a family of her own before being widowed, much like Charlie. The two found a special love late in life.
Charlie helped my mom, get out and get about.
Even though he was, significantly older than her.
Significantly older, but nothing was going to stop him, man. Nothing was going to stop him.
In fact, it was Marianne's car that Charlie was washing that fateful day David Von Drehle first spotted him.
What do you think he would have made of the fact that there is now this book, The Book of Charlie?
I think he'd be surprised that I learned as much about living from him. You'd ask him for his philosophy of life, and he would say, well, my mother always just said to us, do the right thing.
Here's Charlie in his own words.
And if you do the right thing, that takes in a whole raft of things, see? It's so simple that it's so good.
A life philosophy Lori decided to put on that Mustang Charlie loved so much, and a legacy that rolls on to this day.
I'm Lee Cowan. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you right back here next time on Here Comes the Sun.